Have you ever known a couple, or, maybe even been in a relationship yourself, that just feels profoundly stuck in this quiet, agonizing limbo?
Oh, yeah. That incredibly heavy silence.
Right, exactly.
Hmm.
We aren't talking about the dramatic throwing plates, screaming in the driveway kind of fighting. It's just you aren't actively at war, but you are definitely not fully together either.
You're just existing in the same house.
Yeah, passing each other in the kitchen, running this endless internal monologue about whether you should stay or go. Today, we are taking a deep dive into an incredibly fascinating clinical framework that addresses exactly this stage of a relationship.
It's such a critical topic.
It really is. Our sources today center around Empathy, which is a specialized therapy practice in San Francisco founded by a licensed therapist named Figs O'Sullivan. And they outline this specific concept called separation counseling.
Which is a radical departure from how we typically view relationships on the brink. I mean, when couples hit this stage of profound disconnect, the standard cultural playbook, and even the standard therapeutic playbook, actually tends to do far more harm than good.
Which is exactly what we're going to unpack today. The mission for this deep dive is to explore why standard couples therapy can practically destroy a relationship when it's in this fragile state.
Totally.
We are also going to look at why that age-old cultural advice to just, sit down and talk it out is literally a dangerous thing to do to your body in this phase.
Biologically dangerous.
Yeah.
No.
And finally, we will explore why achieving absolute, unfiltered clarity about the relationship is vastly more important than artificially forcing two people to stay together.
To set the stakes for this conversation, we really have to look past the surface-level arguments couples have. This isn't about blaming one person for being emotionally distant or, pointing the finger at the other for being too needy. We are going to be looking at the fascinating and sometimes tragic ways our hardwired survival instincts try to protect us when a profound bond suddenly feels unsafe. Often, what we label as a partner's personality flaw is actually just their survival reflex kicking into overdrive.
Wow. So whether you're trying to make sense of a friend's seemingly sudden divorce, or maybe you're navigating some choppy waters in your own relationship, or you are just intensely curious about the mechanics of human connection, the insights from this clinic are going to completely reframe how you look at commitment.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the most obvious question. How is separation counseling functionally different from traditional couples therapy? Because on the surface, going to a therapist when your marriage is failing sounds like the standard route.
It does sound like it, but the distinction comes down to the underlying premise of the room. Traditional therapy operates on the assumption that both people are actively committed to saving the relationship.
They both want it to work.
Exactly. They might be angry, they might be deeply hurt, but they are both fundamentally bought into the idea of repair. And because of that, a traditional therapist will often prescribe behavioral changes.
Like what?
Oh, they'll suggest scheduling weekly date nights, or they'll teach active listening exercises where you have to repeat back what your partner just said.
But if you try to apply those standard fixes to a couple where one person already has a foot out the door.
It backfires spectacularly.
Right, because separation counseling is explicitly designed for couples suspended in ambivalence.
Yes. The commitment is highly uncertain. If you ask a couple in that state to start going on forced date nights, you aren't building connection. You are generating immense resentment because you're asking people to rearrange the furniture in a house that is currently on fire.
Man, that is a powerful image. The documentation from Empathy describes this state as the limbo between staying and leaving. And the way they articulate the quiet torture of this ambivalence is just striking.
It's exhausting.
It is. It's the slow, grinding agony of running an endless internal cost-benefit analysis while still having to perform the logistics of a shared life.
Right, the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, you're picking up the kids from soccer, you're paying the mortgage, you're asking what's for dinner. But internally, you are constantly searching for a definitive piece of evidence to tip the scales. You're looking for permission to finally leave, or maybe some sudden, undeniable burst of hope to convince you to stay.
And while you were running that silent arithmetic, the system of the relationship just decays. Eventually, couples in this limbo often drop into what the clinical framework calls the ugly basket.
I found that concept so visually helpful. What does it actually look like when a couple is in the ugly basket?
It is the stage of complete resignation. Neither partner is even attempting to get back to good anymore. You might be lying in bed next to the person you built a whole life with, and you realize the hot anger has burned out, the acute sadness is gone, and what's left is just a profound, empty void.
Wow. We tend to view that kind of numbness as a sort of peaceful resignation, like, well, at least they aren't fighting anymore.
Right, society sees the quiet and thinks things are calming down.
But the clinical data suggests that numbness is vastly more dangerous to a relationship than rage.
Think about what anger actually represents in a relationship. A vicious fight, tears, shouting in the kitchen.
Mhm.
Those are forms of protest. They are messy, sure, but they are evidence that the emotional bond still matters.
It means they still care.
Exactly. The relationship is still important enough to cause acute pain. You only yell at someone if you still care about their opinion of you.
So anger is a sign of life, but numbness.
Numbness means your subconscious has concluded that the relationship is fundamentally unsafe. It has initiated a full-scale biological shutdown to protect you from further disappointment. It is the ultimate alarm bell, but it's disguised as silence.
That dynamic creates what the framework calls the waltz of pain. And you usually have two distinct roles in this dance. Let's break those down. First is the relentless lover. This is the partner who protests. They are driven by an underlying fear of abandonment. Early on, they probably fought, criticized, and sent, 12 text messages in a row demanding connection.
We've all seen that or been that.
Yeah. But in the ugly basket stage, they exhaust their survival strategy. Their desperate bids for attention turn into a resigned hopelessness, and they just stop reaching.
And when a relentless lover stops reaching, the core of the relationship is in critical condition. On the other side of that waltz, you have the reluctant lover.
The withdrawer.
Yes. Their behavior is typically driven by a deep fear of inadequacy. When conflict happens, instead of temporarily shutting down to cool off, which is totally normal, they shut down permanently. The framework describes them as retreating to the deepest part of the emotional basement and locking the door.
And what are they doing down in that basement?
Down in that basement, they start quietly building a case for their exit. They keep a mental ledger of every slight and disappointment to justify leaving.
So you have one person who has entirely stopped reaching, and another who has barricaded themselves in the basement. Which brings us to perhaps the most counterintuitive part of this entire deep dive.
The communication myth.
Exactly. Whenever a relationship is struggling, the universal advice from friends, family, and pop culture is always just communicate. Just sit down on the couch and be totally honest about how you feel.
Which, in this specific stage of ambivalence, might be the absolute worst thing you can do.
Hold on, why would honesty be dangerous? Isn't getting everything out in the open always the first step to fixing a problem?
Not when you lack a professional clinical container to hold that honesty. What's fascinating here is the biology. If we look at what happens in the brain, forcing a raw, unstructured conversation about whether a marriage should end is like throwing a match into a powder keg.
Because their nervous systems are already overloaded.
Precisely. When you are confronted with the terrifying reality of potential detachment, your prefrontal cortex, the logical, reasoning part of your brain, goes completely offline. You are flooded.
You're in pure fight or flight.
Yes. You cannot ask two terrified people to logically evaluate the viability of a shared life while their internal alarms are screaming.
The sources outline two highly destructive paths that usually happen when couples try to have this conversation alone in their living room. Let's look at the partner who is leaning toward leaving, the leaver.
Okay.
If they are pushed to just talk, they usually do one of two things. Path one, they sanitize their feelings. They give a watered-down version of the truth to avoid hurting their partner. They might say, I'm just really stressed at work right now.
Which resolves absolutely nothing and keeps them frozen in the limbo.
Right. Or they take path two, which is detonation. The pressure to finally be honest causes them to unload the full, crushing weight of their accumulated resentment all at once.
They list every failure of the past 5 years.
Yes, which completely obliterates whatever fragile trust still remains.
And the partner who wants to stay, the stayer, isn't reacting any better. They are living in a state of acute panic, and they also have two destructive paths.
What do they do?
They might collapse into terror and pleading, please don't do this, I'll change everything, just tell me what to do. And the tragic irony is that clinging so desperately actually confirms the leaver's worst fear.
That staying in the marriage means carrying the exhausting weight of an emotional dependent.
Exactly. The alternative for the stayer is launching a fierce defensive attack. They might criticize the leaver for being selfish, for giving up on the family, for throwing it all away.
Which again just makes things worse.
Because that aggressive protest only confirms the leaver's deeply held belief that the relationship is toxic and they need to escape. Left to their own devices, both people will unwittingly act in ways that guarantee the exact tragedy they're trying to avoid.
That is why a trained third party is so crucial. A separation counselor isn't there to watch you recreate your living room fights in an office. They are there to regulate the emotional temperature.
They act as the container.
Yes. They step in and say, we're going to pause the ultimate decision of whether you should stay or leave. They take the final verdict off the table so the underlying reality can be examined safely.
But for that clinical container to work, there has to be a foundation of truth. Empathy employs a strict rule that highlights this perfectly. It is a no-secrets policy.
I read through their FAQs, and they are incredibly blunt about this. You cannot use their therapy to manage your partner's reaction if you have already secretly decided to leave.
You can't use a therapist as a human shield to soften the blow of a breakup.
Right.
If you have made a final decision and you are just going through the motions of counseling to feel less guilty, you are participating in an implicit denial of reality. The clinical container only functions if both people are standing on honest emotional ground, even if that ground is incredibly shaky.
So once that baseline of honesty is established, the therapist walks the couple through a highly structured four-phase process. Phase 1 is establishing the truth of the room.
Which practically means naming the asymmetry. In almost every struggling couple, one partner is further out the door than the other.
It's rarely exactly 50-50.
Almost never. And you cannot pretend you are both equally invested if you aren't. Naming that asymmetry takes the guesswork out of the room. It stops the silent cost-benefit analysis.
Then comes phase 2, mapping the disconnection. Instead of looking at the explosive fight you had over loading the dishwasher last Tuesday, you trace the entire history of this waltz of pain.
You zoom way out.
Right. You create a map of how two people who once felt like home to each other slowly became adversaries.
The purpose of that map is to shift to the couple's perspective. You have to stop viewing your partner as the enemy and start seeing the cycle you co-created as the enemy.
Replacing individual blame with systemic understanding.
That is the only way to move forward to phase 3, which is accessing primary emotions.
How does a therapist actually get a couple to access those? Because if they're in the ugly basket, aren't they just entirely numb or totally defensive?
The therapist has to guide them beneath the thick armor of their survival strategies. The withdrawer, the one who locked themselves in the basement, has to be guided to find the profound grief and fear of inadequacy that lives underneath their numbness.
And what about the protester?
The protester has to find the raw, unmet longing beneath their quiet resignation. You have to bypass the loud surface music of criticism and withdrawal to hear the sad, vulnerable song playing underneath.
Man, that leads to the final step, phase 4, the missing experience. This is the moment where you speak those deep truths without the weapon of criticism and without the shield of silence.
It's a profound vulnerability.
It is. You attempt to make what the clinic calls the engine of love run one more time. But we need to clarify a crucial term here. The sources talk a lot about EFT, emotionally focused therapy.
Yes. Emotionally focused therapy isn't about teaching you how to negotiate chores or use I statements. It's an approach that focuses on the deep attachment bonds between people.
It targets those primary emotions we just talked about.
Exactly. And the text notes it has a remarkably high improvement rate, around 86%.
But here is the paradigm shift for anyone listening. Success in this four-phase process does not necessarily mean staying married.
It redefines what a successful outcome actually looks like. The goal isn't coercion.
The goal is absolute clarity. If the engine of love does start again, the couple builds what the framework calls a sovereign us. It's an interdependent relationship built on proof of work.
Meaning they have actually done the hard labor of genuine repair, rather than just promising to try harder next time.
Yes, but if the engine fails to start, they separate with grace. They walk away knowing they did everything humanly possible. They understand their own emotional architecture, which means they are far less likely to recreate this exact same tragedy in their next relationship.
Both outcomes, genuine repair or clear-eyed separation, are considered a form of freedom.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. What's wild is that this internal process doesn't happen in a vacuum. The environmental factors surrounding a couple can drastically alter how this limbo plays out.
Oh, absolutely. The source material spends significant time on how where you live can act as an accelerant to a relationship's decay.
This part of the deep dive is fascinating. The author, Figs O'Sullivan, actually used to manage Google's employee stock option plans before he became a therapist.
So he knows the tech world inside and out.
He has a very intimate understanding of the Silicon Valley mindset. The text details how the specific financial and social reality of the San Francisco Bay Area creates a unique geographic trauma for couples.
Consider the logistical stakes of a divorce in that environment. You aren't just splitting up furniture. You are looking at untangling a $2 million mortgage, dividing unvested restricted stock units, factoring in exorbitant private school tuition.
The text highlights a paradox. A couple making $500,000 a year can still feel chronic inadequacy.
They might stay in a completely dead marriage simply because they literally cannot afford to separate.
They are trapped by their ZIP code.
And it isn't just the financial logistics either. It is the vocational overflow. High performers in these intense industries live in a goldfish bowl.
Right. Everyone is watching.
Admitting your marriage is failing can feel like a profound public failure of optimization. So they bring what the framework calls their vocational nervous system home.
What happens when you bring that vocational energy into a marriage?
When you have to run at maximum capacity all day just to maintain your status at work, you are living in a state of hypervigilance. That constant stress directly destabilizes your ability to connect.
Relationships end up absorbing the overflow of stress they didn't even create.
Exactly. A partner essentially becomes an emotional regulator for a corporate environment that is actively hostile to long-term human bonding.
And the very survival strategies that tech culture rewards, emotional compartmentalization, hyper-efficiency, stepping in as the fixer, are absolutely disastrous for romantic intimacy. There's a brilliant analogy in the text for this. It suggests that high achievers often retreat to the penthouse of their emotional building.
I love this analogy. The penthouse is pure logic and strategy. It feels safe up there because everything is quantifiable.
Right.
A tech executive can brilliantly negotiate an $80 million term sheet from that penthouse, but they completely fail when they try to apply that same spreadsheet logic to the messier lower floors of human intimacy. You cannot optimize a grieving spouse.
Meanwhile, the systemic pressure and the shame of not being able to fix things drives the other partner down into the basement of withdrawal. When someone feels like they are failing to provide the emotional or literal life their partner wanted, they disappear inside themselves.
And because the partner in the penthouse senses this withdrawal as a threat, they protest.
They send the 12 texts.
Yes. But that desperate bid for connection just lands as further criticism to the person hiding in the basement. It's an impossible loop, heavily fueled by the environment they live in.
Escaping that loop requires stepping out of isolated suffering. And that brings us to one of the most vital redefinitions in the entire source text, the concept of true independence.
This is huge.
People so often mistake self-protection for independence. If you've been hurt, the natural reaction is to build these thick, permanent walls. You keep everyone at a distance so they can't let you down again, and you call that isolation sovereignty.
The clinical term they use for this is orphan sovereignty. It is essentially a trauma response, masquerading as freedom.
It's rugged individualism functioning as avoidant attachment.
Exactly. A person might think they're being incredibly strong and self-reliant, but they're actually just refusing to participate in the vulnerability required for human connection.
But the text offers an alternative. True emotional sovereignty is not a wall. It's a drawbridge.
A drawbridge implies agency. You have ultimate control over when that bridge goes up to protect yourself and when it comes down to allow someone else in.
Because fundamentally humans are wired to be emotionally bonded.
Yes. If you only have a solid stone wall, you might survive, but you cannot connect. The drawbridge allows you to navigate the world safely without isolating yourself.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Even if you are perfectly single right now or you are in a wonderfully healthy partnership, understanding your own emotional architecture is critical. Knowing where your drawbridge is, recognizing whether your instinct is to protest loudly or retreat to the basement when things get hard, that self-knowledge ensures you don't recreate these tragic cycles in your own life.
It comes down to moving from a state of isolated suffering into what the framework calls we consciousness. Recognizing that the negative cycle is your shared enemy, rather than viewing the person sitting across from you as the enemy.
To summarize our deep dive today, separation counseling isn't about forcing behavioral fixes onto a cracked foundation. It's about achieving absolute clarity over coercion.
Clarity is the goal.
Always. It's about moving out of that quiet, agonizing limbo, bypassing the internal panic that tells you to either attack or run away, and replacing blame with a profound understanding of our own survival strategies. Whether a couple ultimately builds a sovereign us or decides to separate with grace, true success is simply finding honest emotional ground.
That's beautifully said.
And as we wrap up, I'm going to leave you with a final, lingering thought to ponder on your own. We are taught from a very young age that love is a conscious choice. We celebrate our free will in romance. We choose who to marry. We choose who to leave.
But if profound numbness is actually just our biology shutting down to protect us, and if our deeply ingrained fight-or-flight instincts dictate exactly how we argue in our kitchens, how much of our free will and love is actually just our hardwired survival instincts secretly pulling the strings to keep us safe?
Take a moment today to think about where your own drawbridge is currently positioned. Is it rusted shut in the upright position, or are you able to lower it when it really matters? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.